They summoned him as a hero and turned him into a nightmare. To survive, he built his own faction in the shadows and became the king of the dead. After killing the demon king, they sent him home like a used tool. Now his undead empire is out of control, so they summoned him back to fix it. The twist? The kingdom wants him dead and sent his own sister and classmates to hunt the corpse king. What the hell is going on here? Let's go. This story begins with an army of the demon king who wanted to destroy the world, being destroyed by a mysterious group led by a human. Unnoticed, they appeared in this world, gained strength, and swept through like a hurricane, defeating everyone with their strongest warriors, the Hakai. Eventually, the warriors held a knife to the demon king's throat. He breathlessly asked, "Who are they?" A man in a skull mask introduced himself as the king of the dead, the leader of Helheim. The king of the dead informed his team that it was all over and ordered them to move out. But after a while, the dead king suddenly disappeared. The protagonist woke up in his room, fixed his hair, and thought it was another dream. MC knew that the dead king of hell was actually a man named Hizaki Shio. He was an ordinary high school student, but one day, his entire class was summoned to another world. However, he lost his classmates one by one and was eventually left alone. Hizaki, obsessed with revenge, transformed himself into the dead king. He gathered an army capable of opposing the demon king and created a secret society called Helheim. Ultimately, the dead king defeated the demon king, after which he was returned to the ordinary world where this story begins. He clutched his head and began to suffer. What a shame. What the hell is Helheim? And what kind of dead king is hell? Hizaki, with tears in his eyes, thought that it would be better if his 8th grade syndrome died along with the demon king. MC sat at the doctor's office and thought about how none of his classmates had returned. He sadly realized that only a month had passed in the real world, but it had taken him 5 years to return to normal life. Hizaki pondered the memory of his friends, the girl he liked, and even the guy he couldn't get along with, all dead. He thought about how he wouldn't forget them. The protagonist slapped himself and realized he needed to wake up. Today was his graduation ceremony at his old school, so he had to keep going, even with survivor's guilt. He walked out the door and saw the girl with surprise on his face. The protagonist realized this was the scene of an unforgettable beginning. The white-haired girl waved and said they hadn't seen each other in a while. She sweetly called him by his name and asked, or rather, the dead king. Hizaki looked at her with displeasure and asked her not to call him that. He asked the girl, what does she want, since he's already defeated the demon king? MC glanced at her with hostility and asked, what does she want from him? The girl stuffed a snack in her mouth and said, well, some gang, Helheim, is causing trouble in her world, and he needs to do something about it. Hizaki asked, perplexed. What? God looked at him and repeated, Helheim. Well, he knows. Helheim, the secret society he created. Well, Helheim? The protagonist rudely replied that he understood everything and asked to stop repeating. She raised her hand and asked if he knew how difficult it was to find him again among all these worlds. Hizaki calmly replied that he had been forcibly sent back and didn't know what was going on there. God looked at him and replied that she knew, which is why she had come to pick him up personally. She informed him that his children were misbehaving and that he was responsible for them. God suggested sending him away quickly and asked, would he mind a random location? The protagonist loudly asked if she was changing her tone too abruptly. He remembered his magical abilities and asked, they will return, right? With a smile on her face, God spread her arms and announced that everything would be reset. All the ice magic he had studied, as well as all the special abilities that had turned him into a dead king. MC, with a sad expression on his face, thought how sorry he was. He silently remembered his classmates. God calmed him down and said that there was nothing he could do in this situation. This happens to everyone who leaves this world. She asked him not to blame himself too much and added he repaid his debt to his classmates by defeating the demon king. Hizaki clenched his fist and agreed with her, adding that it was true and that he created Helheim and he bears responsibility. The protagonist asked her with interest, so what about their seals? She cast a spell around herself and replied, they're gone. MC thought with surprise. Seriously? God reassured him, telling him that they were still just kids, and even without their seals, they would believe in him and fulfill their vows. It's touching, isn't it? The protagonist lowered his head and said, in that case, he doesn't understand why Helheim is acting up. And something else must have happened. God began casting a spell. O terrible king who rules over the mountain of the dead, let them praise his heaven-given powers. Hizaki was caught up in the spell, and the king of the dead returned. God smiled and announced that it was time to leave his comfort zone. She raised a finger to her mouth and added that she didn't usually do this, but she left him a small reward for saving the world. Nilf ran her hand over the dead king's throne and thought that today, too, he hadn't returned. She looked at the throne and wondered how much time had passed since his disappearance. Nilf said quietly, sadly, without him, the Hakai have dispersed. The dead king knew that her presence of mind and her brain held the organization together. After all, she was his right hand. Nilf cried profusely, thinking about him. She didn't care if she never saw him again, as long as he was alive. The girl heard a ringing and knocking at the door. She wiped the tears from under her eyes and ran to the entrance, thinking that only the Hakai and the dead king himself knew about this place. Nilf opened the door slightly and peered outside. Garm, tears streaming down her face, jumped on her and began to hug her. The girl looked at her tear-stained face and asked why she was there. Garm caught her breath and told her that she had smelled the scent of their dead king. Nilf listened, wide-eyed, unable to believe that their king had returned. The protagonist woke up on the ground and examined himself. He realized the transfer seemed to have gone smoothly and decided to check his status first. MC extended his hand in front of him and his status displayed. Hizaki, available magic, ice magic, level 1. He saw the ability, Blessing of Death. The power of this ability depends on the total number of creatures' lives taken, 0-100. MC raised his head and looked at the sky. He realized that Blessing of Death, this ability is the root of all evil. The protagonist knew, demons or humans, whatever acts in this world doesn't matter, because the more he wins, the stronger he becomes. This simple, powerful, and incomparable ability, however, has one caveat. The acquisition of skills depends on the total number of allies lost, and this is a disgusting way to acquire abilities. Hizaki remembered the first time his classmate's ability had transferred to him, and he thought he'd go mad from experiencing everything he'd been through. He sadly lowered his head and thought that now they were all dead, and because of that, he was able to kill the Demon King. The protagonist thought, this time, we wouldn't allow this ability to activate, and he wouldn't let it happen again. He conjured an ice blade in his hand, and realized he needed to find them first. Hizaki began chopping branches with the blade and set out. Asha walked through the forest, thinking that until yesterday it had been an ordinary forest. She relayed this information to her attendants. They asked in confusion, was the Griffin Forest frozen? They began chatting among themselves, recalling that, aside from minor demons and rebels, it was, after all, an ordinary forest. The guard suggested that perhaps some special demon had appeared there. An attendant asked the princess to remain there, adding that he would dispatch knights. Asha noticed ice crystals on the ground and paused. She decided she had to do something. After all, she was the heir to the royal bloodline that had defeated the Demon King. Asha stepped outside and felt a chill on her skin. She realized it was magical ice, and there were no signs of life around. The princess tensed, surmising that it must indeed be some powerful demon. She heard strange sounds in the bushes and followed them. Asha drew her sword and prepared to face the demon or beast. She saw a man sitting exhausted on the ground and ran up to him. Asha asked him with concern in her voice if he was okay. The princess urged him to hold on and asked if he was attacked by a demon. The protagonist, in a quiet, hoarse voice, said he was starving. Asha offered him food, and he began to eat. Hizaki quickly shoved the food into his mouth, saying it was so delicious he could die of happiness. She saw this and politely asked him to eat more slowly. The protagonist thanked her and said he thought he would die here. She agreed with him, adding that no one expected something like this to happen to the forest. Hizaki noticed the family crest on her breastplate. Asha placed it on her arm and said she had completely forgotten to introduce herself. The protagonist looked at her in confusion, waiting for an answer. The girl asked him not to be surprised, because she was the 5th princess of the Holy Kingdom of Griffiel. She raised her hands and proudly introduced herself. Asha El Griffiel. The protagonist was surprised by her words and asked, the 5th princess? Asha saw his surprise and answered, yes. Hizaki looked at her and asked, are there actually 5? The princess placed her hand on her chest and loudly replied that she was right in front of him, a descendant of the royal family that defeated the Demon King 180 years ago. The protagonist extended his hand and asked for a second. He paused for thought and quietly said, the royal family that defeated the Demon King 180 years ago? What does that mean? Asha asked him what he was muttering under his breath and added, have you forgotten? She asked, what's his name? Hizaki tried to introduce himself, but a cold sword was pressed to his neck and he was told not to move. They ordered the princess to sit still, or he would be finished. Asha asked loudly, with displeasure in her voice, who they were, and whether they had frozen the forest. Lucas said the princess's name and added, who would have thought that simply freezing the forest could catch such a fish for them? He introduced himself as Luca and said that he was from the secret society Helheim, a high-ranking member and head of intelligence. Lucas placed his hand on his chest and said that he was glad to meet them. The protagonist heard that he was from Helheim and quietly added that they had a problem with him. Lucas laid the princess and the protagonist on the ground and tied them up. With a sly smile on his face, he added, they knew that if something serious happened in the forest, the Holy Kingdom would do something about it. Lucas glanced at the protagonist and added that they hadn't even expected to capture such a cunning boar, and with a bonus, no less. Hizaki lay silently on the ground, watching them. Lucas sat down next to the princess and stroked her leg. He asked her not to worry, as she would be treated with respect, although he might want her company if he got lonely. Asha angrily called him an idiot and said he deserved 1,000 more deaths. Lucas quietly exhaled and kicked Hizaki hard in the head. The protagonist was thrown slightly to the side by the blow. Asha loudly asked him to stop, as it wasn't his fault. Lucas glanced at her and said he'd heard that despite her appearance, she possessed impressive fighting skills and a strong sense of justice. He smiled and remarked that this was the easiest way to control someone like her. Hizaki quietly called out to him and asked who he was. Lucas turned to the protagonist and asked, "What?" MC said in a weakened voice that he didn't know him. "From intelligence, Lucas?" His expression changed dramatically, and he said loudly and angrily, "In this day and age, everyone knows about Helheim." Lucas spread his arms and pointed at the frozen forest, adding that he was one of the low-ranking members of society, and this frozen forest was his power. He laughed loudly and called it the power of Lucas the Wise. Asha screamed, "Enough," and struck. Lucas angrily declared, "She will have to be punished for this." He added, "After all, Helheim is an evil, inhuman organization that rules the world from the shadows, and he will show her his special brand of horror." The protagonist said weakly, "There are no such people." Lucas glared at him again. Hizaki asked him if he heard. MC broke the shackles on his hands and added, "There are no such people in Helheim." Lucas's team looked at the protagonist in surprise. Hizaki shouted angrily, "If only they would all shut up and listen." He added loudly, "First of all, what's the point of secret societies if he just announces them out loud and there's no point?" Hizaki remarked, "Calling himself evil and inhumane is so lame." The crowd stood in confusion, not understanding who and what he was. The protagonist told them about hiding in the shadows, having vague motives, being elusive, because if the whole world found out, what kind of secret society would it be? MC sighed with relief and said how glad he was that they weren't behind this strange event. Lucas, confused, asked what was he talking about. In short, Hizaki cast a freezing spell at them, adding that high-ranking Helheim members don't reveal their names, and if he doesn't do the same, then he's no good for Helheim. The crowd didn't have time to process what had happened before they were encased in ice. The protagonist pointed at the frozen Lucas and asked, "He knows, right? He didn't freeze the forest." MC explained how he'd taken 1,458 lives in the month he'd been here. Lucas was almost completely covered in ice, but he still didn't understand what it meant. Hizaki glanced at his right hand and said, "If he doesn't understand what that means, then he's definitely not a member of Helheim." He snapped his fingers, and Lucas shattered into pieces. MC calmly added, "And don't you dare take Helheim's name for yourself." The protagonist paused and realized that Helheim had truly become so famous, his ridiculous fantasies spreading across the world. He scratched his head and realized the nickname was so similar to something he could have come up with himself that his head hurt. MC glanced to the side and saw the princess in a fighting stance. She loudly asked him, "So he's behind this? To do this to the forest?" Hizaki apologized for overdoing it a bit and suggested defeating even more demons. Asha loudly ordered him to stand still. The princess, with a hint of fear in her voice, asked, "What is his goal and why did he do this?" The protagonist scratched his chin and thought, "To kill demons, perhaps?" MC knew that the demon king might be dead, but the other demons were still alive and attacking people. He thought that the princess would understand him for the sake of defeating them. The protagonist saw the princess grip the sword tightly and nervously with both hands, and politely asked her not to be afraid of him. Asha lowered the sword and loudly declared that she was not afraid. MC introduced himself and added that he was an ordinary man. The princess heard his name, and her eyes widened in surprise. He informed her that it was time for him to go, as he still had things to do. Hizaki waved and said he would thank her if he remembered. Asha stood motionless and repeated his name. She realized that this was the dead king, the enemy of the hero who defeated the Demon King and founded the Griffiel royal family. The hero had defeated him many times, and moreover, he was a great sinner, having taken the lives of 32 of the hero's companions. Asha looked at her hand and realized that she could not defeat him now. But if this truly was the dead king, she had no choice but to defeat him. She thought of her city and swore on the name of the royal family. Nidhog's assistant reported that the sea of Griffiel trees had frozen over. Nidhog said it didn't look like ordinary magic and could be the work of some powerful demon, or the Demon King himself. He assumed it was just a theory, and ordered him to inform the Emperor to await news. The assistants accepted the order. Nidhogg looked out the window and realized there was no doubt they were waiting for him. She laughed loudly, called his name, and turned into a girl with long hair. Nidhogg decided to go straight to him. Hizaki looked at his status and realized the blessing of death was working like last time. First 100 lives, then 1,000, then 2. He knew the mountain of corpses would raise him to a new level until killing demons became second nature. MC thought with sadness on his face, "Kill, kill, kill." He shook his head from side to side and realized there was no point in remembering it now. Hizaki glanced into the depths of the forest and noticed something. He ordered the two to come out, since he knew they were there. MC thought silently and calmly, maybe they wouldn't want to until he did it. He wondered, wouldn't they be embarrassed themselves since he himself had come up with this idea? but even he felt terribly embarrassed. Hizaki exhaled and decided that he would do it himself. He shouted loudly towards the forest, "Come out and bow before him." Garm and Nilf emerged from the forest, unkilled and unblemished. He looked at them with a smile and told them how glad he was that they were all right. Nilf didn't recognize him and asked, "Is that him, the dead king?" Hizaki smiled and nodded approvingly. Garm quietly asked, "Their king?" The protagonist confirmed her words, although he wished they would stop calling him that. The girls were speechless and looked at him silently. MC knew how long they had been waiting for him, and in this case, he couldn't disappoint them. Hizaki lowered his head and apologized for keeping them waiting so long. He extended his hand and with a smile announced that the dead king had returned. Tears welled up in the Nilf's eyes at hearing his words. They greeted him and rushed to hug him. Garm, with tears in her eyes, said, "And not for long." She greeted him and hugged him back. Hizaki exhaled heavily and hugged them back. Nilf handed him her cloak and asked him to take it. The protagonist picked up his Helheim cape and remembered how he deliberately cut it up. He looked at the girls with a smile and put the cape on. Hizaki said, honestly, he still thought it was cool. The girls silently looked at him, admiring him. MC suggested they go find those who had appropriated their name and crush them with their own hands. He ordered them to follow him and turned around. Garm loudly declared, "Anything for the king." Hizaki knelt down and clutched his head. Nilf, her voice full of worry, asked, "Dead king, what happened?" He exhaled heavily and said, "Everything is fine, he just died a little inside." He added, "This whole shameful nightmare is his 8th grade syndrome, but he's glad he's back." Hizaki said, "He's back." The protagonist told the girls that he froze the sea of griffule trees and was following this path. He pointed at the map and said they seemed to be somewhere near this clearing. Nilf guessed the landscape had probably changed over the long years of magic and demonic influence, and previously unexplored areas had been explored in recent years, so this map only showed the general picture, unfortunately. The protagonist added, "Better than nothing," and pointed at the city. He quietly told her that if they wanted to get to know the area better, they should go to the Traveler's City, the Ghat. Nilf agreed with him, adding, "That would be best." Garm smiled and said she hadn't been to the Ghat in a long time. Hizaki scratched his chin and suggested, "Where people gather, information gathers, and perhaps that's how they could learn about those who had brazenly appropriated the name of Helheim." Garm murmured admiringly, "The king is incredible," she added with a smile. "He sounds like an ordinary person," and called him a great actor. Nilf corrected her and said, "Their king is capable of anything, and besides, it's not that hard to play the harmless guy, right? A dead king?" He smiled silently and thought, "A normal guy, huh?" He nodded approvingly, and thought he's just being himself though. This would be the easiest way for them to gather information. Hizaki intended to stick to this plan. He added, "Besides, for certain reasons, he was weaker now than at the peak of his power, and therefore he would count on them." Nilf answered him loudly. She would protect him even with her life. She thought about how this was the first time the king had said he would count on them. The protagonist smiled sweetly and asked, "Really?" He thought about how he had always relied on them. He saw how they worshipped him and realized he needed to quickly regain his strength. Hizaki heard strange sounds and turned around. They saw a huge demon. Nilf noted, a demon, and not the weakest one, which meant this was at least a level 5 part of the forest. The protagonist wondered what troublesome place he'd been teleported to. Garm raised her hand and began loudly pleading, calling herself reliable. Hizaki glanced at her and said with a smile, "Well, he was counting on her." Garm jumped with joy and screamed. She charged and stood in front of the demon. The demon tried to strike her but missed. Garm dodged, stuck out her tongue and taunted the demon. The demon struck again, hitting the girl. Nilf let out a worried breath and watched from the sidelines. Garm stood up, dusted herself off, and remarked on how strong he was, but these tricks wouldn't work. The protagonist glanced at her and smiled, remarking that Garm was perfect. She charged, having the indestructible body of a beast. She grabbed the demon and killed it. Hizaki looked at her and said it was impressive, as always. Nilf added that even as an ally, she was surprised by this. Garm had an ability, an indestructible beast body, that protected her from all but fatal damage, so she could only be defeated with a single, incredibly powerful blow. Being a beastman, she was already very resilient. But even among them, her abilities stood out, as she was extra in the word extraordinary. Garm smiled with a bloody face and asked, "Well?" The protagonist thanked her, saying he knew he could rely on her. He saw the blood on her face and helped wipe it away. Garm chuckled quietly, as it tickled her. Hizaki remembered how she had always been the most troublesome. He was glad she was on his side. They arrived at the Traveler's City and saw screaming passersby. Nilf noticed the agitated travelers and asked, "What's going on?" The protagonist looked at them and thought about how nostalgic Ghat was, as it was the first city they'd found themselves in after being summoned. He sadly lowered his face. Garm noticed this and asked him what was wrong. He replied, "Nothing. Let's start gathering information." MC knew it was impossible to rule out the possibility that the group pretending to be Helheim contained genuine members of the society, but if they did, the damage would be far greater. He entered the tavern and realized he needed to stop dwelling on useless things. Hizaki decided to find out everything about their intentions, behavior, and traces. He walked past the people toward the counter, but everyone began to notice him. She thought he needed to find some talkative adventurers. He started looking around and thought that the hairstyle, the look, the leather equipment were those of a beginner. These were second or third level adventurers from the same village or something like that. That meant it wouldn't be that hard to get them to talk. Then everything was decided. A worried adventurer called Ando and said he had drunk too much. He started to leave, apologized, and said he was going to vomit. She asked if he was okay. Maybe she should go with him. He refused and left the building. The main character approached her and asked if she was here alone. She shook her head and said that she was here with a friend. He sat down at the same table with her and said that he would then sit down. She was indignant about this and said that she had warned him. He asked her to wait and said that he just wanted to ask a couple of questions. Or was she against it? At the same time, his sister Hyuka was walking down the street with other students and thought that her brother had overslept today, wondering if he would make it in time. A guy approached her and wished her good morning. She passed by and reciprocated with indifference. He said with embarrassment that since today was a short day, he wanted to know. Maybe he didn't have time to finish because she interrupted him and said that she had already promised to meet her brother. He was upset and said that it was understandable. Then another time, she walked on and thought that she liked someone, her brother. For example, his face, they look like their parents. It's quite normal that he is handsome. Besides, he cares about his family and is especially kind to them. In other words, her brother is incredibly handsome, kind, and they have been close since childhood. She entered the office and thought that there is no reason not to like him. The love affairs of her peers do not interest her. Suddenly, she and her classmates were teleported to an unknown white space. They were all very worried about what happened, started to panic and loudly asked, "What is this place and where did the office go? Everything is white here, she can't see anything. What should they do now?" God came to them and said that it has started. They were all summoned to another world, and now they must try hard. Hyuka looked at her and asked, "Did she say another world?" The students were very surprised by this and asked the same question. They loudly asked, "What does that even mean? What is isekai?" The main problem with extroverts is that they don't know anything about being summoned to other worlds. What is she even talking about? She must return them to the office. She calmly walked up to them and said that everything will be fine. They will all be taken care of. She will make sure of it, so they can relax and enjoy life in another world. Hyuka raised her hand, asked them to wait, and said that she does not want this. The god looked at her and said that the summoning was not her doing. All questions should be directed to the locals who summoned them. Now the fun part begins. Everyone who is summoned to another world receives an ability, a special power, a skill. They can call it whatever they want. They must use their power to help the summoner, and the rest of the time they can dispose of it as they wish. No study or work. They can surround themselves with women or men, chase wealth or fame. They will move in the same order in which they touch this sphere. They can start now. The students were happy to hear this, and immediately went to touch the sphere. The student who had previously tried to talk to Hyuka extended his hand to her and said that they should go too. She stood calmly in place and said that she was asking him to go ahead. She wanted to think alone. If he goes, he should go on his own. The god looked at her and asked, "She won't go. It's going to close soon, right?" She looked at her and asked if she refused to go, what would happen then? She stood next to the sphere and said that whoever didn't go would remain locked in this white place forever. She said politely with a calm expression that she was asking to be brought back. She said that she couldn't do that. She raised her hands and asked in a frightening voice, "And what if she killed her?" She was scared because of this and asked how she could say that. However, unfortunately, she couldn't die. Nothing would work out for her. She thought about it, and the god asked what her name was. She looked at her with a thoughtful look and introduced herself. She was surprised when she heard it and said that that's it. Her brother had recently disappeared for about a month, right? She guessed right. The answer to this riddle lies ahead. Hyuka looked at her and thought, this woman knows her brother's secret? If so, she will be able to return home like him, right? She asked, after completing the mission, she can come back, right? She said that it worked for him. She looked at it and thought that it turns out that this is a one-way ticket with no guarantee of return. She touched the sphere, and the god remained standing in this place and said that she wondered how many would survive this time. At the same time, MC asked, he recently returned here, but there was some kind of commotion here. Does she know anything about it? The adventurer said that apparently a demon of a medium level of power has appeared. In the unexplored area of the third level, the battlefield cage, several people also went missing at once. He asked, did this happen in such a place? Is she okay? She was very embarrassed about it, blushed, and said that it was probably so. That demon in the form of huge armor is probably to blame. Everyone says it's all because of that demon. If he's so interested, why not look at the missing people notice board? He said with a thoughtful expression that he wanted to ask one more thing. Had she heard anything about Helheim? She asked. Everyone in the Empire knows about them now, right? He said that seems to be the case. By the way, does she know what they do or something? She remembered it and said that they do something like fulfill the wishes of demonic tribes. It seems that they are constantly engaged in robberies, kidnappings, and murders in the Empire. Sooner or later, they will be hunted across the continent, it seems. He thanked her for the story and said that she had helped him a lot. She was very embarrassed, looked away, and said that she was glad to help. Ando returned to the tavern and called Nim. She was very surprised when she heard him, turned around and asked in a confused voice, "Is he okay?" He laughed and asked why she was so blushing. She was about to say something, looked away and asked where he went. At the same time, Nilf was walking through the slums and came across a task and said that she needed information. The man looked at her and asked if she had money. If not, he could exchange it for one night. He extended his hand to her, but she walked around him with incredible speed and went up to the guys sitting at the table. She called one of them chief and said that she needed information. This is exchanged for other information or money. She was already tired of dealing with trash, who did not understand this. He was surprised by what happened and thought that she immediately understood that he was in charge here. With a calm expression on her face, she said that she needed information about Helheim, the fresher the better. He said that nothing concrete was known about them, mostly just rumors. He reached for the goblet of alcohol and said that, however, there was one thing that could be connected to the current hype. He almost took it, but was very surprised when it disappeared at the last moment. He looked at the place and thought that he was sure that he had taken the cup and was ready to swear. However, why was it there? He asked. Was it she who did this? She remained silent, and he thought that an information broker who controlled time. Did she really exist? He said that payment for information was not necessary. Proof of their existence would be enough. At the same time, Garm was walking down the street and said that she found almost no information. She came out onto a busy street where many people were discussing something and said that it was too noisy here. She listened and heard people say that it was Niflheim. He doesn't think he can stay here for such a low level. They say that a powerful demon has appeared. It's so scary. He heard that people are disappearing in the battlefield cage again. They are definitely finished. It seems that Niflheim is involved in this. She sighed with displeasure and said that if she showed such information to others, she would definitely not be praised. Suddenly, she heard she call her name, and with some surprise, thought that he knew she had used her power. As expected, the king knew everything. After that, they all gathered in the room and he said that the missing people were in an unexplored area, a mid-level demon in this third-level area. If they put everything they discovered together, two things would become clear. 7 people were missing, the first of which was a month ago. She asked, "This demon, wasn't it the one she had defeated earlier?" She was about to say something else, and Nilf agreed and said that humans were involved. Demons restore mana by absorbing the life force of others. The average demon would never survive in such a low-level zone, he said with a thoughtful expression, which meant someone was feeding him. They should return to the battlefield cage. At the same time, 3 adventurers entered the cave and were surprised when they saw the dead demon and asked, "Yoroi is dead. Who could have killed him?" Even if it was a simple explorer, it was definitely not an ordinary person. It was unclear what was going on. They should return to the city for now. The man standing behind them said that they should wait. His 2 comrades were killed. He wanted to take their explorer cards. Would they be able to help him? The 2 adventurers looked at him and agreed to help him. He walked through the cave and said that it was here they should follow him. They came to this place and saw a dead end, which confused them a little, and they asked, "Is it really here?" Suddenly, the floor beneath the adventurers collapsed and they said loudly that it hurt so much. "Is he okay?" The bespectacled adventurer looked up, saw the man who had brought them here, and asked, "He's okay, right? He has to get them out of here." Another adventurer looked down and asked with a frightened expression, "Are there 3 bodies?" He looked at them and asked, "Didn't he say there were 2? He looked at the card, saw his face on it, and said, "Besides, this card is his Explorer ID, right? Who is he then?" The man's face began to change, and with a frightening grimace, he said that it was a complete success. A multitude of huge ants gathered around the adventurers, and he called them dear explorers and said, "Welcome to the devil's breeding ground." As he saw, this was their first time here, right? He completely transformed into a monster and said that he was the 57th greater demon, the head of Os. This was their beautiful meeting and parting. He raised his hands above his head and loudly said that they should raise their glasses of blood. He thought that the highest demons are demons that are on par with and even surpass the human mind, a gathering of demons that follow the king and destroy people. They assign themselves hierarchical ranks. The highest rank is the king, then the monarch, prince, marquis, and count. Finally, the head. He goes beyond the established framework. He does not pose a direct threat, but his thoughts are disgusting and monstrous. An individual who displays power by subjugating other demons. He was able to transform himself and other living beings. He looked at the adventurers who were being attacked by monsters and said that they should get back on their feet. He laughed loudly and said that he finally managed to get to this point, step by step turning the researchers into demons. He certainly did not expect that his best work, the armor created by transforming these people, would be destroyed. However, if he manages to gather even this many mid-class demons, the king's awakening will not be far off. The unexpectedly created demon was sealed in an ice crystal and heard someone ask, "He underestimated them, didn't he?" He looked to the side and saw the protagonist, who said with a calm expression that he never thought it would be a supreme demon. At the same time, a group of students found themselves in the royal palace, and the man in front of them said, "So it seems the last brave one has arrived. Welcome to the sacred kingdom of Griffiel. He is the king of this kingdom. His name is L. He asks for their help in stopping the atrocities of Helheim, the crystal of hostility that is spreading throughout this world. He implores them to join forces and defeat the king of the dead. This is his daughter Asha. She was chosen by the magical summoning sphere from another world to become its owner. She will walk with them as a guide. The students discussed her appearance, and Hyoka thought that she should continue the conversation now. She approached them, introduced herself, and said that she was the 5th princess of this kingdom. She called them young brave men and said that she was asking for their help. First, they should let her evaluate their unique talents. The students followed her and asked what talents were. Is it something like when fire comes out of your hand? Is this what the girl in the t-shirt was talking about? He really hopes to get an imbalanced talent. She walked with the others and thought that she wanted to go home. Asha reached the right room and said that she would ask them to come here one by one in order to conduct the evaluation. One of the students noticed armed knights in this room and asked if they were really going to fight. Hyuka entered this room and immediately used ice magic, which attacked all the knights in the room. The princess ran up to her, called out loudly for her, and asked if she really knew how to use ice magic. In the modern world, this technique has been lost, and the only one who still possesses it is the dead king. She asked with an indifferent expression, "Is that really true?" Suddenly a system window appeared in front of her, displaying her name and the applicable magic. Human magic. Talent, Silver Star's favorite. Increases magical and physical strength during combat in an icy environment. Maintains the effect of automatic evasion and counterattack. Dead Ice King's sister. Proof that a god has shown interest. Overcoming the limit of ice magic development. She read it and asked, "Is the dead king her brother?"